ridiculous conversation and realize that you're not actually talking. In this case, we are actually talking. Amazing, it worked the first time. 50% of the time, it works all the time. Yeah, amazing. Yeah, let me introduce us. We're here, Bitcoin Park, Robert Warren with Mike Hamilton, who's joining us in our lead up to Thames 25, which is essentially one short week away. Basically, here. I'd love to jump in first off saying, Mike, who are you? Introduce us to yourself. Tell us a little bit about your work and interests, maybe back even further in Bitcoin mining and kind of even what you're trained in, because that's fascinating as well. And what brings you here today?
Started there. No, I did sell straight into Bitcoin.
Was that nice hash? Is that what you were using?
Honestly, I don't even remember uh, what tools I was using back then. I literally had no idea what the hell I was doing. Uh, all I knew is my wife was yelling at me because the basement of the house was, you know, 105 degrees, and it was a it was a cluster. Well, the cleaning people would come and trip the breakers when they'd turn the vacuum on. Uh, yeah, it was something.
That's lost up time.
Luckily, I evolved into the full time Bitcoin miner later. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I got started in 2016. Trey, our founder and CEO at Grid, he was the one that actually got me sucked into Bitcoin mining. But before that, I'd run an endpoint security company, so sort of the network security, endpoint security space for a long time. And before that, I was actually, uh, when I was in high school, I was a pretty big gamer, as much as you could be on a dial-up modem before DSL hit. Um, but So I wanted to be a graphics. I wanted to design graphics chips, graphics cards. So I went to school to be chip designer, to be a circuit designer. Uh, did ultimately do that, not unfortunately for on the GPU side. Ended up in the network processor side, which is ultimately how I ended up in the network security space. Sort of that sort of transition. So yeah, so I was a chip designer. Did lots of work at Grid around the actual chips themselves, which are the ASICs themselves, not the
There we
machines.
go.
Um, uh, yeah, so I've been around a little bit on the chip side. Did a few things there, and there's lots of interesting stuff happening there as well in the space. So, anyways, that's the meandering version.
So you were kind of beautifully primed to jump into this Bitcoin space. It's always fun to hear how people found themselves, particularly in the pre-2020 kind of wave of individuals, how you found yourself in Bitcoin, because you really had to kind of have something that was adjacent, directly adjacent to Bitcoin to make it not even quite click, just kind of go, oh, this seems unique. It sounds like you had the chip side of things, you had the network security kind of thing, and maybe that set a few light bulbs off to go, oh, this could be something else. I mean,
Yeah,
2016, 2017, those are is grid even in existence at that point in time?
no,
How are you converting this Ethereum mining into Bitcoin mining and your job at the time?
yeah. So at the time, I was actually running product for the endpoint security company. I ended up taking over a few years later. Trey had joined about a year after I had, and we got to be friends. And he was like, "Hey, you should check out this Bitcoin thing." Um, and I'd actually heard of it. Funny story, in my early network security days, uh, I ran a product for a company. We were building network test equipment, and had a big security research team. And one of those security researchers was Dustin Trammell, who was one of the early Bitcoin folks that traded coins
Sure.
with Satoshi, and has gone on to create a large Bitcoin native venture fund. But so I'd heard of it, had never really like gotten involved. But Trey's thought was that I would think the mining part was interesting, and that's actually what sucked me in. It was really just uh, uh, the the hardware, the just the uniqueness of what Bitcoin mining is. Now, again, like I said, I did start on the Ethereum side, and really what I was trying to do was see if I could. At the time, Amazon AWS had just launched their FPGA instances, and I was trying to see if I could create an Ethereum miner on the AWS FPGA instances, uh, that I could arbitrage against, the hourly cost. Now I
How
was
to make a
off,
miner without owning the hardware, if I'm
yeah,
understanding.
yeah, that pretty much, and so I got within about an order and a half of magnitude, from a theoretical concept, but it turns out it's pretty hard to overcome a couple orders of magnitude in efficiency. But it was a fun exercise, and sort of spurred my interest, longer term in mining and blockchain, in particular. But uh, it was much later that I came to the sort of the economic, fiscal aspect of Bitcoin. It was really the
Sure.
technology under the hood, and I even came much later to the actual Bitcoin underlying technology, even just in the last couple years. But yeah, just the mining ecosystem and how unique it was very interesting. Uh, you got me hooked.
I'm always curious to hear folks who come from the overtly technical side of things and wind up in mining, because coming from, as I self-describe, a Cro-Magnon knuckle dragging chicken shack miner who really started with just blowing things up and ordering a couple of S9s that were delivered to my fifth-story apartment, and then turning my second bathroom into a sauna, and having my fiance at the time look at me and go, am I gonna marry you? And then have to figure that out pretty quickly. It's always interesting to me because when you look at it from the technical side, you're almost drastically overqualified to be starting a Bitcoin mine in 2018, 2019, 2020, because the units themselves are not at a degree of technical advancement at that point in time where, the cooling is air cooled. It's just the birth of immersion. If you look at any top tier data center on Earth, what we are doing is insulting to what a lot of these folks are building. They laugh you out of the room. You're going to have stuff that is air cooled and has open air exposure, so you don't have any back pressure on it, and you're just going to basically put it in a shed with no sides, and that's how you're going to operate your infrastructure. Are you out of your freaking mind? What was that like for you? Was it difficult to grok these early days of Bitcoin mining, mega mine setups because of this?
No, I think that's a super interesting point. And we always like to say that we were a tier -1 data center. Um, and so I think if you think back to 2019, 'cause it was, I guess, July. I think we broke ground in July of 2019, on our first site. Um, and if you think back, the stack really wasn't there. Um, Now you've got several different minor management software packages. You've got more sophisticated pools. You've got different payout schemes. You've got all sorts of different things. But back then, you know, we actually built the first site with ant boxes, that we got
Wow.
super deep discount. Um, and I can remember crawling on my hands and knees because they actually had actuated louvers, But of course, they don't come with any control, and so I'm crawling around on my hands and knees with, with 20 gauge wire, trying to wire these actuators so we can control the louvers to, let more airflow in, or block out some of the noise. Network infrastructure was a disaster. Um, I think while it is, uh, insulting what a Bitcoin mine, or at least historically what they had been relative to, an actual data center. I think what it lacked in sophistication, it more than made up for with just the sheer number of problems that people hadn't run into before. Uh, like you said, just taking ambient air through, maybe if you're lucky, some filters, or maybe even some cooling walls that you may or may not use, but serve as an extra layer of protection,
Hmm.
which is all fine and dandy until you get a freezing fog that gets sucked right into the right through the filters, and you fried 2% of your machines because they got wet.
Yeah.
So it didn't lack for problems to solve, which I think was one of the more compelling aspects, certainly to the early days. And if I'm honest, as we got later on and sort of had, we had our container slash building, designed, we went through several different iterations. That was a super fun process. Then you sort of get that to the cookie cutter, let's go stamp out these containers, stamp out these buildings, our network infrastructure. It's the same IP scheme based, on the building and the rack and the shelf. And then it becomes sort of like, okay, what do we do now? Uh,
Hmm.
Now, then, of course, the minute you say that, you go find a new site, and then there's unique problems with neighbors, or a zoo being next door,
A
or
zoo being
people.
next door.
Yeah, there was a site that we had looked at, that there was like a dude that was doing like a sort of like a wildlife sanctuary, and he was basically trying to say that, and that was actually going to be an immersion cooled site, uh, that the dry cooler fans were going to basically make his animals not procreate, and that they weren't going to be able to sleep, and they were all going to die. Uh, and as crowds with pitchforks are wont to do, they're like, "Yeah, what he said," and
That's right.
run around with the pitchforks. Uh, but it's human nature, and but anyways, so sorry, that was a little meandering, but yeah, I think just that there was so. I mean, obviously there were large scale mines, in when we started, uh, but there weren't so many. Certainly not as many as there are today, and so just so many problems that hadn't been solved yet, or even thought about. That was really an exciting and fun. Yeah, the first 18 months at Grid were maybe the most favorite 18 months of work I've ever had, and I had some pretty fun times. But it was just so unique and exciting. We wrote a couple of price rips, wrote a couple of massive drops. There was something new every day.
It's never not exciting. It's going to be funny when folks 5, 10 years from now are using all of these very standardized ways of looking at an analyzing Bitcoin mining for whatever application it might be, load balancing, pure play mining, some kind of heating deployment, something like this, as an ancillary system to some other industrial system. It's going to be funny when it goes back and just becomes status quo. And I have a feeling that it might be hard for the engineers 10 years from now to relate to a lot of us who are living through these early days problems. What do you mean you got a machine and you guys didn't know how to network them? I don't know, man. Like, nobody knew how to network these things. They had no idea how to network them. Well, how would you control them? I don't know. You scan the IPs and then log into each one by one to update firmware. Well, dang, that's not going to work. Why don't you use Foreman or OBM? Because it didn't exist, dude. It wasn't going to exist for another couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there was Awesome Miner, which may have been just about the only tool. I think Bitmain had their own little
Yeah.
tool for like locating. Um, so I wrote everything. I wrote everything that we did ourselves.
Amazing.
At one point, I even had coming out of the endpoint security space, I even had an agent running on all of our miners. Whichever ones weren't already, jailbroken, if you, however you want to define it, but hacked a few different firmware versions so that I could drop my own, agent on there so that we could respond to our power curtailment calls. Uh, I could get, if a miner doesn't show up on the pool, that was maybe the best way at the time to really have an idea of what was going on with the machine. But
Seriously.
lack of a machine talking could be a network cable gets unplugged. It could be, you know, a blown PDU. It could be, a fuse. It could be a breaker. Any number of things. So yeah, there was none of that tooling. I mean, you were there. I mean, you felt it. So yeah, so we built our own that worked for us. And obviously, there's lots of really good tools out there now.
So now you've been in the space for quite a while. You obviously helped turn Grid into what it became, and then it went public, and then it was purchased by CleanSpark. Um, Catch us up to where you are today. What are you up to now?
Yeah, so since leaving after we closed the merger end of last year, I've just been working on a couple of different projects, really just sort of sounding board for folks. Hey, we're thinking about doing this. What do you think? And sort of, those sort of, consulting type engagements. I've helped on some site acquisition type stuff and, looking at power contracts and, identifying sites that, are ready to go. Here's 10 sites. Which of these should we, given this amount of money and this machine mix, what's the right, which of these is the right ones? Um, and then I've always had some. I know it's not always popular in the mining or the hardcore Bitcoin space, but I still got a couple of ordinals related projects that I do from time to time just to get back into UTXO management and some of the things on the Bitcoin core side that it's so easy in mining to sort of forget about
Yeah.
and ignore.
What do you have a sense of kind of where we're going? You've seen such a long trajectory of the Bitcoin mining space. You have the technical competence to really understand a lot of the argumentation and discussion around the mempool, around spam and filters and this ongoing talk. Do you have a sense of where the puck is heading just because you've had such a deep experience in the industry for so long?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting question, and I think not unlike if you ever played air hockey, um, and my kids love to play air hockey. Anytime we're at the arcade, and that puck is just bouncing all over the place, and then like we're both trying to hit it and we can't hit it because it's going too fast, and then it's changing direction constantly. That's kind of what this feels like. Um, I can understand asking the questions about, spam, about filtering. I can understand asking a question about anything that has the potential to make Bitcoin less good money or make it less functional. Uh, and there's arguments that, ordinals do that, and some of the other, you know, ordinals, some of the other protocols, meta protocols on top of it. Uh, that said, there's also this, an open monetary network doesn't get to gatekeep how you use the system. Now, that doesn't mean you don't necessarily change something to make things, more difficult to exploit. I say exploit. I don't consider it an exploit. It's a byproduct of of how Taproot works.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think it's really hard to know um, which how that ultimately plays out. Uh, I mean, I think the laws of unintended consequences are going to come down in full effect, no matter which direction it goes, and then the pendulum will swing back. The puck is going to bounce off the wall in another direction. Now, it may be much slower moving on the order of multiple years between these things, these changes of direction. But I don't know if I have a good answer for you in which way it goes. I truly hope that the openness of what Bitcoin is supposed to be prevails, as opposed to a narrower view of spam or uh, you know bad transactions. Uh, so I don't know.
Yeah, it's so hard to frame, and I always try to think about in true middle child fashion, what's the common ground that folks are agreeing on? It's not the case that I'm sure there's always folks that are very, very, very kind of off the deep end and picking fights and wanting to start just wrestling with everybody. But my general sense is that, okay, well, nobody in this conversation doesn't like Bitcoin. Nobody in this conversation doesn't want Bitcoin to succeed. We're having a conversation where there's a really, really existential feeling disagreement about if we do this thing today, does it change the trajectory, like you're saying, the movement of the puck for Bitcoin in such a way that we can't even play the game anymore? And it's so hard to understand. I was trying to catch up on this disagreement that everyone's having about potentially removing or suggesting the removal of op return this morning, and it was great to follow along in the Bitcoin thread that they have on their Gmail list. And it was nice because there's all these disagreements happening, and then all of a sudden at the end of it, Peter Woolley comes in, who is an absolute master in the space, and in the course of a few paragraphs, just beautifully recenters everything on the most important metrics at hand, which is do everything you can to not mess up mining incentives. Huge. And recognize that some of us are going to have to hold our noses for whatever happens next. Because in some senses, you're saying with Taproot activation, the cat's out of the bag. It's not going to be a thing where we put it back. It's now more of a question of managing what some people see as a mistake, and some people say, oh, that's just the natural consequence of the thing that we made. In terms of the forward projects that you have, are there any particular interests that are calling you? Is it strictly into mining? Is it being more site based? Is it being more on the tech based side of things? What's speaking to your Bitcoin miner heart today?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. The first being yeah, sort of this convergence of um, you know AI, HPC, and Bitcoin miners specifically. It wasn't too long ago that I had some thoughts about actually starting something in this sort of domain, but coming at it from the hardware side. And if you think about just the sheer amount of Bitcoin mining infrastructure that is uh, not necessarily of data center grade, how can you, as as hash price or whatever, as mining economics, you know, they're effectively designed to go to a low margin, as low as margin as sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and how could you reutilize that infrastructure in alternative use cases, knowing the constraints of generally relatively low network connectivity, not something you need a ton of in the mining space. Obviously, cooling and and structure, power redundancy. That's another one of the interesting things about Bitcoin mining is not needing, the power company, not necessarily the utilities, not having to have 2.5x capacity. It's like, look, if you need to cut us off, cut us off. We're good. Um, and so I think how people approach that problem of either trying to find machines that have alternative uses that can fit into existing mining space, or converting existing mining space to something different. I think that's going to be an interesting play. There was a I'm an investor in a company, and we do it's mining, but also gas production, and so having a pipeline connected well, so you basically allowing yourself to arbitrage between mining off the gas versus selling the gas into the pipeline. And when gas
Hmm.
hits 850, gas is doing pretty good. When gas is $2, then mining, even at low hash price, is still quite a bit better. And so I think we're going to see something similar, and that's maybe been a smaller subset of the gas mining space in Bitcoin, but I think you'll see a subset of that similar discussion in how do you arbitrage between uh, AI HPC, which is currently paying pretty well, but also is there a bubble coming? It's like it's a very interesting problem. Not unlike Bitcoin mining and the backlog of transformers and switchgear, and as that got cleared, and then this large, I mean, what is hash rate? Doubled, tripled in the last 18 months. I mean, it's just crazy how fast it's growing. But anyway, so the AI HPC, I think, is uh, and the intersection with mining, I think, is a very interesting problem. Uh, and then second, uh, is to me, as I think about Bitcoin adoption, people using it, and how it intersects with mining fees. I think the layer two space, which I have not done as much, I had not previously done as much on. I've actually spent quite a bit of time in the last few months looking at all the different layer two proposals, some of the solutions, and all are in various subsets of development. Obviously, Lightning being the most mature, but you've got Stacks, uh, you've got Arch, you've got all sorts of different, spider chains, all sorts of different layer twos popping up. And I think how that plays out in the next, 6 months, 12 months, is going to be very interesting, especially in relation to, whether or not it's OpCat or, CTV or whatever those, opcode, proposals are, um, that either make things simpler or allow things to come back to layer one, which then ultimately probably still move back to layer two purely from an economic standpoint. Uh, those are the two areas I think that are the most interesting for me in the coming months, years.
It's the topics of the hour, so to speak. We're coming into our final couple minutes. I'm couldn't be happier to have you attending Thames in Austin, our very first one next week. So it's basically here. Do you have any final thoughts, considerations, questions, maybe a message to folks who have never attended a Thames who might want to know what it is, what it's like, because it's a bit of a unique thing in the world of summits. It's not really a conference, it's not really a business summit. It's got loads of people in the space, but yeah, if you could send us off with your final thoughts as a veteran in the attendee of Bitcoin Park summits, what would you tell to a prospective individual?
No, I mean, I think I would say find a way to get there. Uh, People like to say, oh, like, the usage of Signal, that's not terminology that I necessarily use, but it is a bunch of really smart people having very nuanced and insightful conversations about a lot of really different, interesting topics. Because there are so many unique and varied topics in mining, in the energy space, and how that intersects. And it's so hard to be well versed in all or many or even some of those. And the amount of people and the experts that show up and are willing to share their insights and thoughts in a format that is very intimate, um, and it's it's literally the best event, the best Bitcoin event there is. It's everything that Bitcoin 25 in Vegas will not be. If you uh, if you want to learn and you want to meet people uh, that that understand and that care about Bitcoin and making it better and making it work, uh, then that's the place to be.
Mike, we're so excited to have you in attendance again. You're an OG and the attendee of the summits that we've been having, and thank you for joining us for a little bit in our lead up to the events of next week.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to be there and looking forward to it. It's a very long commute uh, from my house here.
I love it. Let me hit the button here. We